Have you ever noticed a plant that has been injured? Maybe it was stepped on or cut and has re-healed itself. Sometimes it's not as straight, but it is definitely, there has been a repair process that has gone on. As the saying goes, as the twig is bent, the tree is inclined. Plants have a capacity to heal themselves. And one of the ways they do this is by making anti-inflammatory molecules. Curcumin from turmeric is an example of this. Turmeric is a wonderful anti-inflammatory herb, and the molecule curcumin the plant uses to help with its own healing and reduce its own inflammation. That can be a benefit for us as humans for our health and our well-being. There's a willow tree behind me here in the image behind me. Willow makes salicylates, which are anti-inflammatory molecules that the willow tree will use when it is injured. And those have formed the foundation of the popular pharmaceutical drug aspirin. Aspirin is made from salicylates, and the acetylsalicylic acid in aspirin has faster effects than willow bark for pain. However, the aspirin causes stomach irritation and stomach damage that the willow bark doesn't. They have equivalent pain-relieving therapeutic effects. However, the willow bark does not cause stomach damage like the aspirin does, because willow contains other molecules, polyphenols, for example, that possess their own stomach soothing and anti-inflammatory effects, so that when willow bark is taken, it may act a little more slowly than the aspirin, but one of the huge benefits is that the stomach irritation is protected by the extra polyphenols that are present in the willow. We see this all throughout the plant kingdom, how single isolates will have problems that are frequently mitigated by the mixture of multiple chemicals in plants. Caffeine is a classic example. Caffeine by itself in an energy drink as an isolate can cause a lot of anxiety, especially in some of these energy drinks with as much as like 500 milligrams of caffeine. If we look at tea, for example, tea has caffeine in it, but it also has a molecule called L-theanine in it. Coffee does not contain L-theanine. The tea does. When we drink a coffee with the equivalent amount to the tea, we usually get a little bit more of a lift from the coffee. It's very noticeable. If you drink both, you'll notice there's definitely a difference with that. But the L-theanine in the tea prevents some of this anxiety-inducing aspect of the caffeine. And we can take L-theanine as a molecule all by itself. It's very popular. It affects the GABA neurotransmission cascade and has its own therapeutic properties as well. But when combined with the caffeine, you still get a little lift, but without the anxiety. We see this also in cannabis with THC that can cause short-term memory loss, but if THC is accompanied by CBD in the whole plant mixture, it helps to mitigate or reduce some of the short-term memory aspects of it. Ancient peoples, from Native Americans to the Greeks to the Egyptians, all over the world have used willow for pain relief. They've also, wherever cannabis is grown, they have used cannabis. Part of the wisdom of plant medicine is that it is utilizing multiple chemicals that tend to be easier on the physiology than the single molecules themselves. What do I mean by that? I mean that for a plant cell to be able to survive, the plant cannot make chemicals that are so harsh to its physiology that they become toxic. So by definition, plants make molecules that tend to be tolerable to cell physiology for plant cells. If the plant makes molecules that are overly toxic, that can be poisonous to its own physiology. What we see is frequently in pharmacology a spectrum of toxicity as we move away from the plant molecule further and further towards more refined and synthetic molecules. Often we will see a gradual increase in toxicity across that spectrum. One good example of this is the spectrum of opiates from the opium poppy, which is the plant where we get opiates from. The plant used as a tea in traditional Chinese medicine is very, very mild. But if you score the plants and you take those opiates out and you refine them, they can become morphine or heroin, which are much more toxic and dangerous to the physiology because we have altered them chemically. And if you take a synthetic, which is even further refined from the original plant molecule, that's fentanyl. So we see this a lot when we take a molecule or a plant mixture, we isolate a chemical and then we further refine it. They become or can become more and more toxic to the physiology. Another example is with cocaine, comes from coca tea. Coca tea is, I wouldn't call it healthy, but it certainly has a lot fewer implications to health than, say, powdered cocaine, which is a refinement of the coca tea. And if we further refine the powdered cocaine, we get crack, which is even more dangerous to the physiology. We see this all the time in the science of pharmacognosy, where plant molecules can be relatively benign in the plant itself. And as refinement occurs, further isolates are developed, new, slightly different molecules are developed, the toxicity can increase. I'm going to be talking about these and other topics in a series of short videos I will be doing, and I'll be collating them all together at the end, which I will present in my newsletter, The Flow State Apprentice. Feel free to follow me at sweetwaterholistic.com, where I'll be posting all of these and my other videos. Leave a comment if you care to, and feel free to subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Dr. Jake Felice, and you can find me on both LinkedIn and at sweetwaterholistic.com. Cheers. Synergy basics. How have toxicity problems with single molecule drugs taught us about the wisdom of plant mixtures? Despite their noticeable and obvious successes, the 20th century model of using a single chemical drug acting on a single biochemical pathway is beginning to show its age. The model's limitations largely have to do with issues of drug toxicity, also relatively poor efficacy in the face of these epidemics of complex chronic diseases that we are facing. And over time, a slow trend in medicine can be seen moving away from this single molecule model towards the idea of modern multi-drug cocktails, especially when it comes to very complex chronic diseases like cancer or chronic neurodegenerative diseases, or certainly certain types of heart diseases. These diseases are almost invariably complex. They involve multiple numbers of biochemical pathways, as well as proteins and genes. So the idea of utilizing a single agent to address a single pathway a lot of the times falls short with these complex diseases. Also, some of the new drugs, newly synthesized chemical entities, may be unique molecules that have never ever before existed in the history of the world or of the universe even. And this is why we must thoroughly test new drugs, because many of the times these new chemicals have never encountered a physiology before. Plant molecules, on the other hand, without exception, 100% of them have been generated within plant cells. So they exist within a life form, and the vast majority of which have been doing this for millions and millions of years. And this is why they tend to be less toxic than new chemical entities that have never before existed before. And not only do the single molecule drugs have problems with toxicity, They also will have trouble in terms of resistance, whether that be bacterial resistance or, in the case of an example that I'll use next, viral replication and mutation in the case of HIV drugs. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a pharmacologic story that relates directly to plant synergy. And one of the weaknesses of monotherapy, single drug therapy, became evident with the advent of these new antiretroviral drugs to treat HIV and AIDS in the 1990s. The first one of these medications was AZT. AZT was an amazing drug, and it was really amazing because the viral loads came down very consistently with these patients. One of the downsides with AZT as a standalone is liver toxicity. Some patients couldn't handle the overall toxicity, but it was for those who could, it was really great to see the viral loads coming down. However, unfortunately, over time, the virus started to mutate, but its toxicity didn't change. So its effectiveness against the virus became less and less. And what happened over time is new classes of antiretroviral drugs became available, and practitioners started using combinations of different medications to address the problem. And these work very similarly to how plant molecules work and plant medications work. The combination of different approaches allowed for greater efficacy, lower toxicity, and fewer side effects in the patients. We see this over and over again, this idea of using multiple chemical compounds, allowing for lower doses, better effects, less toxicity, fewer side effects. If we look at blood pressure medication, for example, most patients with high blood pressure don't just get by on using one medication. Frequently, they have to use two medications that address two different pathways at the same time, such as perhaps a beta blocker and a diuretic, or a beta blocker and an ACE inhibitor. And if patients have chronic diabetes or kidney disease, a lot of the times they might require 3 or even more medications to help control their blood pressure. And as I mentioned, these medications focus on influencing multiple pharmacologic pathways, and they are generally more successful and have fewer negative side effects than single medications alone. So this is kind of where I'm going with the wisdom of plant medicine. By addressing multiple targets with botanicals, the combination of different plant chemicals on multiple biochemical pathways can cause an increased therapeutic benefit with lesser and lower toxicity. And if you combine that with the fact that in general, a lot of the times the plant molecules are a lot less toxic than the pharmaceutical drugs, you can begin to see some of the wisdom and intelligence of this approach. In modern medicine, you can Google this. This approach is called network pharmacology. And when the right mixture is reached, the combination allows for maximum physiologic benefits, while at the same time minimizing side effects and toxicity. And since plant formulations contain multiple chemicals, the emerging science of network biology is really helping to connect the gap between understanding how and why plant medicine works and providing a pharmacologic rationale. We call this effect with plant medicine, sometimes we call this entourage effect or synergy effect, or sometimes additive effects, when multiple chemicals in plant mixtures not only prevent negative side effects, which is what I talked about in the previous video clip, but also can enhance and create positive effects. I will talk about this in the next video clip. And we'll be talking about these extensively through the next series of videos. I encourage you to like, to share, to follow along for the ride. And I really appreciate you listening. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. You can find me at sweetwaterholistic.com, as well as on LinkedIn and YouTube. Give these videos a like. Feel free to comment. I try to respond to all of my comments, and I really appreciate you listening. Thank you. How can botanical synergy enhance our digestive health? Botanicals can be a wonderful way to support and supplement good, healthy digestion. They are remarkably gentle. They can be very easy on the system, and at the same time incorporate not only elements that support digestive health, but also our gut microbiome as well. I think the real important piece that I'm trying to communicate today is that in botanical medicine, it is very rare that we just only use one single herb. And I want to talk about why that is in the context of good, healthy digestion, and talk about the three major categories of digestive herbs and why it makes sense to combine them. I'll also talk about a particular botanical blend that has 12 clinical studies in humans, including 2 randomized controlled trials against a known synthetic reference drug, showing equal or superior effectiveness to the prescription, with at the same time lower toxicity and higher tolerability. So what are these three major classes of botanical herbs? Well, we have aromatics, we have bitters, and we have demulcents. And there are many other categories of digestive herbs, including things that promote or prevent inflammation, etc. But I just want to focus on 3 of these today. And we often will blend them. We will blend the aromatics and the bitters with the food. And then much of the time we will give demulcents in between meals. And also, as of a note, if you want to try these for your own self, bitters are typically used in small doses. And so let's talk about aromatics. Aromatics really do help a lot with peristalsis, which is moving food through the gut. And they also can support and stimulate the digestive enzymes and absorption of nutrients. One way that aromatic enzymes do this is that through their interaction with the olfactory system, our nose, the smell of these aromatics when tasted and also inhaled through the nose can send signals to our brain to stimulate the result of pancreatic and stomach digestive enzymes and enhance stomach activity. This can help improve the breakdown and absorption of our food, leading to better digestion. The volatile oils, including many terpenes found in aromatic plants, have antispasmodic properties, so they help the gut to move things through. And this can also help reduce cramping and bloating. One of my favorites is peppermint. I love it. Drinking peppermint tea at the moment. And peppermint has been shown to have a relaxing effect on the smooth muscles of the gut, which help to reduce symptoms of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And finally, aromatics also have antimicrobial properties, which can help to promote a healthy gut. Certain compounds in garlic, for example, have been shown to have antibacterial and antifungal properties that can help prevent the growth of harmful or bad bacteria. You can check out my course and videos on probiotics, which I'll link to below. The second class of botanicals that should be used in most digestive formulas, or many that is, are bitters. Bitters are typically composed of bitter tasting herbs. Makes sense, doesn't it? And these are typically taken in small amounts before or after meals to support digestion. I find it interesting that in the States, we tend to eat our salads before a meal, but in the European tradition, it's typically after. And a lot of times the bitter bitter leaves of lettuce in endive, for example, or certain types of romaine will have bitters in them that can help enhance digestion. Bitters do this also by stimulating digestive enzymes and reducing bloating. Bitters can also support liver health. Many herbs used to support liver health are bitters. Milk thistle, for example. If you ever taste a thistle, it's quite bitter, and all types of thistle can help the liver. And burdock root, one of my favorites. The Japanese make a burdock dish that is just so delicious and wonderful. So bitters can also, in addition to what we classically think of as digestion, also support the liver. They also can aid in appetite stimulation by triggering the release of gastric juices and digestive enzymes. Dandelion is another common one. Gentian, artichoke, which is in the thistle family, and golden seal, which is becoming rare and expensive. But golden seal is also a wonderful bitter and a tonic herb. The last category are demulcents. They're typically taken between meals, although sometimes can be included in a formula. And those help soothe and calm the digestive tracts. They're very soothing. Marshmallow, not the candy, but the plant, is a wonderful demulcent herb. And one of my favorites is slippery elm. If we combine the different herbs together in one product, a lot of the times these herbs can work together. There's a botanical formula called Iberogast. It's a standard formula that consists of 9 different plants. There have been 12 clinical studies, including, as I mentioned, 2 in comparison with synthetic reference drugs, which show complete therapeutic equivalence to the 2 synthetic proton pump inhibitors that they were tested against, with the extra added advantage that the plant preparation showed fewer to no side effects in comparison to the synthetics. And the reason to go along with the synergy theme is that the botanical formula is hitting multiple targets, including demulcent activity. It's that affects gastrointestinal hypersensitivity. Those demulcents are soothing, as well as inflammation and decreasing acid secretion. That's just the beginning. These are synergy basics. I'll be talking more about this throughout the next series of videos. So please stay tuned. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. Sweetwaterholistic.com is where you can find me and many of my videos. I appreciate your likes. I appreciate your follows. Please feel free to leave a comment. I do try to answer all of my comments and really do try to get to those as much as possible. I'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for listening. Cheers. Today I want to talk about synergy and the problem of antimicrobial resistance. We have been using single molecule antibiotics since the age of penicillin to treat bacterial infections, and bacteria over time have been developing an amazing resistance to even our most modern antibiotics. And lately we have not had a new pharmacologic class of antibiotics created in the last 30 years. So we are losing the battle against the bugs. But the plants have been battling the bugs for millions and millions of years. They have been using chemicals to protect themselves against bacteria for millions and millions of years. And they don't use single chemicals typically. They will, in the real world, the plants will use combinations of multiple molecules to protect themselves against bacteria. And this has several advantages. One is it gives the effectiveness of the plant molecules a much broader spectrum of activity. And it also enhances effectiveness. And a very important thing that the synergistic principles also do is they prevent resistance of the bacteria. And there's several examples of this. I'd like to talk about a couple today. Part of the problem, I think, is that pharmaceutical assays, when they are looking at plants, are typically only looking for chemicals that have antibacterial properties in and of themselves. And a lot of the times these assays miss a lot of these really important chemicals because these chemicals are indirectly supporting the antibacterial properties. They don't actually have antibacterial properties themselves, but they help the antibacterial molecule. I'm going to explain this in a little bit more simple detail here. So let's look at how plants prevent bacterial infections in the real world. I want to use an example of a wormwood species that is from traditional Vietnamese medicine. This wormwood creates a chemical called artemisian, which is very well known to prevent malaria or to kill the malarial parasite, for example. And pharmaceutical companies have utilized this molecule and variations of it to treat malaria as a single molecule isolate. But a lot of the times what happens is very quickly the malarial parasite develops resistance to the artemisian chemical that the plant is making. But the pharmaceutical industry is using it as an isolate. When we use it as an isolate, part of what the staphylococcus or the staph bacteria do is they upregulate what's called an efflux pump, where the bacteria literally, the artemisian comes into them and the bacteria are pumping it out. Kind of like when a boat is filling with water and you turn the bilge pumps on and it pumps out the water. The bacteria do this to the single molecule isolate. But if you use a whole chemical or a whole plant mixture rather than the single chemical, that single chemical doesn't have some of the indirect properties that the whole plant does. And in the case of this wormwood species, it has a flavonoid that actually doesn't do anything to the malarial parasite at all, but it turns off that efflux pump. It turns off the bilge pump. So if we are using primitive assays to look at antimicrobial resistance, we are going to be missing a huge amount of the molecules that the plant is actually using. And the plants make mixtures typically to do this, and they don't use single molecules, or rather I should say they rarely use single molecules to achieve one purpose. They're usually combining the attack. Also, in botanical medicine, there's this myth that I think is propagated a lot of the times in the cannabis industry that we typically only use or evaluate one plant. In botanical medicine, we use multiple plants, and I'm going to just to illustrate this. Another example. One of my favorite botanicals is Oregon grape. I live in the Northwest. It grows everywhere around here. And the root of Oregon grape has this beautiful yellow color. And it contains chemicals. They're also found in golden seal. They're called it's an alkaloid. It's in the alkaloid family, and it's a berberine alkaloid. Caffeine is an alkaloid. Psilocybin in magic mushrooms is an alkaloid. Plants will a lot of the times use alkaloids. And alkaloids are also very good. This particular berberine alkaloid is a very good antibacterial. But again, if you are just utilizing a single molecule or not using multiple plants, resistance can develop quickly. And the Native Americans would use a mixture of Oregon grapefruit and something called Colorado bearberry. And the Colorado bearberry has a chemical that has no activity in and of itself, but it also has a different chemical that turns off the efflux pump. So different continent, different species of plant, and in the Northwest tradition, using a combination of two different plants to achieve the same effects. I find it fascinating that local people using indigenous technology have had the insight to do things that combine these plants in this way. And so compared with the dominant paradigm of single drugs, plant synergy provides functional advantages in the real world, providing multiple evolutionary benefits. If we observe nature, Plants rarely produce chemicals alone, and the plant molecules almost always occur in mixtures with other potentially bioactive secondary substances, secondary chemicals. So plant mixtures, the combination of chemicals, evolve within evolutionary pressures that tend to prevent the development of antimicrobial resistance. So we have a lot to learn from this antibiotic era that has created, through single molecules, this huge problem of antibiotic resistance. And the plants can teach us how to utilize and combine molecules in a synergistic fashion to help enhance broadness of activity, enhance effectiveness while using lower doses, which decreases toxicity to us when it's used as medicine, and also prevent resistance. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. Really appreciate you listening. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat below and feel free to share this video. You can find me at sweetwaterholistic.com, and I really appreciate you listening. Cheers. Hey everybody, greetings from surf camp, Nia Bay, Washington. I'm hiding out from the wind here, but if you stay to the end of the video, I'll show you a picture of the beach. I want to talk about plant synergy and verification of plant synergy. I think there's a problem that very few people seem to understand what synergy is, and I'm going to be producing a few short videos that hopefully help describe that in more detail. And we can verify synergistic effects through detailed pharmacologic investigation and by clinical studies that are performed in comparison with synthetic reference drugs. And one definition of synergy involves the cooperative effects when multiple plant chemicals interact to produce something where the whole of their interactions is greater than the sum of their parts. And we can more specifically define synergy as occurring when multiple chemicals have these greater effects that in a method that's called the isobol method of Birnbaum, and it is one of the very practical methods in terms of ability to design experiments, and it's also very effective in demonstrating clinical synergy. The image you'll see here is a graph where the scientists are looking at two different chemicals from the ginkgo plant and how they affect blood clotting and platelet activation factor. And the graph, you will see that the interactions are concavely curved towards the 0 point, and in this case that shows a synergistic effect. If they were to follow that dotted line, that would be simply an additive effect, and if the curve were mirrored in the opposite direction, that would actually be pharmacologic antagonism. So that is a very effective way to do it. With synergy, we have something that commonly occurs known as the polyvalent effect. Multiple biochemical pathways need to be hit at the same time, so you can't have synergistic effects with single molecule drugs that are just hitting the same target. And we have a lot of new science, and with the advent of AI, new technologies and advances are coming out that are demonstrating the advantages of multi-target botanicals in clinical trials, and many clinical trials of plant extracts that are studied in parallel with patented synthetic reference drugs for the same indication have been done. So they're comparing them with a known drug effect, and in all cases the superiority of the plant extracts over the single chemical drugs has been demonstrated, with the plant mixtures and preparations fully equivalent to the reference drugs, but with the added benefit of fewer or no side effects. And part of what's happening, I think, is that this approach to therapy addresses not only robustness but also disturbances in these biochemical networks rather than searching for individual pathways, individual targets, such as single disease causing genes. And we're starting to begin to have a large body of evidence on this right now. Over 200 placebo controlled randomized clinical trials, with over half in comparison with the synthetic reference drugs, have been performed. And the results have almost surprisingly shown that there is a significant therapeutic equivalence, but very importantly, I think, less toxicity with the plants. I think that that's one of the really it's one of the things I wish I heard more in the popular discussion of synergy, is that it's not only just about equivalency or superiority of effects, but also decreased toxicity. And in some of these trials, the plant preparations are showing superiority over the standard preparations, not only in terms of effects, but also in terms of tolerability, which I stated. So anyway, in the next video, I want to talk about 4 possible mechanisms that underlie synergistic effects. You can find me, Dr. Jake Felice, and more of my videos at sweetwaterholistic.com. I really appreciate you listening and being here. I'm going to be doing a few more videos from the beach today, or rather this week, because it's hot in Washington and we're going to be cool by the coast here, enjoying ourselves, having fun, getting our work done, and surfing every day. Stay tuned for that little clip of the coast. Really appreciate you listening. Give these videos likes, comments, and shares. And thanks again. Appreciate y'all. Okay, everybody. Thanks for tuning in so far. It's a little windy on the beach, so I'm talking here as we're walking out from the campsite. This is beautiful Nia Bay, Washington, northwest U.S. coast. The water is still pretty far out and the tide has to come in, so we're going to wait. Sorry, I'll still this. We're going to wait for high tide before we get in the water. And this is one of my absolute favorite places on this earth. I would say waves are probably shoulder high out there. You see some folks in the inside there surfing, but it's kind of closing out on the outside. Anyway, I would consider this one of my favorite spots on the planet. Nia Bay, northwest Washington coast. Thanks. Greetings from Surf Camp on the northwest Washington coast out near Nia Bay. Today I want to talk about mechanisms of plant synergy. I think there's a lot of poor understanding of what plant synergy is, and even some folks who don't even believe that it's a thing, which I think is a sad commentary on the state of the science. Also, one of the huge benefits of synergistic principles that plants provide is low toxicity with frequently equal or greater efficacy than standard conventional pharmaceutical drugs. So I think that plants have a lot to offer and a lot to teach us. By combining multiple molecules acting on different receptor systems, that's how synergy works biologically. You cannot just be working on one receptor system, and much of the time it requires multiple chemicals. So these synergistic multi-target effects, where multiple combinations affect multiple targets, enzymes, substrates, receptors, ion channels, transport protein, DNA, RNA. This is how synergy works on multiple pathways. One of the main mechanisms of synergy, and I'm going to do a separate video to discuss each one of these because I want to keep my videos shorter, but the combination of molecules together gives better efficacy. We see this often in pain studies where CBD is combined with THC, and the resultant effect is of a higher degree of efficacy. But also, plant chemicals and mixtures can decrease negative side effects. Caffeine, for example, can cause a lot of anxiety. But with tea, as opposed to coffee, tea contains a molecule called L-theanine, and L-theanine is GABAergic. It works on the GABA pathway, and it helps calm the system. So a lot of the times, even if a cup of tea has the equivalent amount of a cup of coffee, we don't get the same effect. L-theanine in and of itself can be a wonderful molecule as far as that goes. Synergistic mechanisms can improve absorption or improve how the body uses the chemicals. This can be pharmacokinetic or physiochemical effects. One way that some terpenes work, and I'm not saying terpenes in cannabis to be clear, but in many other plant studies, is that they can increase the lipid solubility, and also certain chemicals, non-terpene related plant chemicals, can also affect membrane fluidity, which can affect absorption and kinetics. Also, close to my heart with the plants are antibacterial mechanisms and enhanced antibacterial effects. We see that a lot of the times, if we are just using a single chemical, the bacteria or the bug, so to speak, viruses, will quickly develop or can quickly develop resistance. But when we utilize a combinatory effect, that can decrease the development of antibacterial resistance, which is a huge problem in the world today, and it can also cause for a broader or wider spectrum of efficacy. And you'll see this in triple antibiotic ointments, for example. There's a reason there are three of them in there. A lot of the times the single molecules are not the best effect. And lastly, one of my favorites is when we are using plants together, they can reduce or eliminate or neutralize the toxicities of that might be presented by other plants or other agents. So in traditional Chinese medicine, this is a very common theme. Many times they're called envoy herbs or guide herbs. And the envoy herbs can improve the efficacy of an herbal formula by allowing us to use more of a therapeutic substance that might have some toxicity or a narrow therapeutic window and help broaden that. I talked a little bit about this in regards to foxglove digitalis in a prior video. If you're interested, you can check those out. And also, what's really cool about some of these guide herbs from the Chinese medicine perspective is they can target or guide the therapeutic actions to specific organs or to specific areas of the body. So not only can they reduce or eliminate toxicity and increase effects, but they can also help move the formula or the effectiveness to certain areas of the body. I think licorice and ginger on the western side of the botanical spectrum are very useful in this regard. In the next series of videos here from Surf Camp, I am going to be taking each of these points individually and going into them in more detail. So stay tuned if you would like more information. And you can follow me and my work at sweetwaterholistic.com. It's a small natural media health company. And I really appreciate you listening. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. Please like, please share, please comment, ask questions. I try to answer as many of the comments as I can, and I really appreciate you listening and hope everybody is well and staying cool this hot summer. Cheers. Aloha and welcome from Surf Camp at the Northwest Washington coast. Today I want to talk a little bit about why plant molecules have such low toxicity and can still be effective, and the reason for this has to do with principles of synergy. And I want to talk about something called the polyvalent effect, which is essentially when, in order to have synergy biologically, there have to be multiple receptor systems targeted at the same time. If we are only using a single molecule drug that affects a single receptor system, there's no chance or possibility for synergy to occur because, as I mentioned, multiple biochemical pathways need to be elucidated for synergy. And just as a reminder, synergy is where the whole of the effects are greater than the sum of the parts. And the reason that plants utilize synergy to achieve biologic effects, whether that be to protect against bacteria or to protect against predators, is because they have to. And the reason they have to is because they need to have effectiveness in order for their survival to be ensured. And the best way from an evolutionary perspective that plants have achieved this is through the utilization of multiple chemical mixtures at the same time. It's typically how plants work most of the time, and there are notable exceptions, and we'll talk about one today, namely CBD. CBD is a single molecule that the plant makes. The plant actually makes CBD in an acid form to prevent the other foliage from growing underneath the hemp or the cannabis plant. But CBD does not act on a single receptor system. It acts on many receptor systems, including indirectly the CB1 and CB2 receptors. It also works on serotonin receptors, which is why it can help calm us down a lot of the time. Works on adenosine receptors, PPAR receptors, GPR55, and others. So in and of itself, CBD can almost have a type of a synergistic effect, and that's largely because it's stabilizing biologic networks. If you want to Google network pharmacology, I think you'll find a lot of interesting reading. And when you do that reading, think about it in the terms of multiple receptor systems. Some of our best antibiotics also are not just only acting on single receptors. They act in multiple areas. And if you think about what makes an antibiotic good, part of what makes an antibiotic good is the prevention of bacterial resistance. It's a big problem in the world today, and our better antibiotics work on multiple pathways, and nearly all of the plant antibiotics work on multiple pathways. CBD, by the way, is a has fantastic antibiotic properties and at very low concentration, largely because it is working in more than area at once. So think about the evolutionary pressures that plants face. They have to produce chemicals within their own physiology, so they can't make things that are so toxic that the plants kill themselves. They have to use lower toxic molecules, and yet at the same time they have to be effective towards their target. So they do this through the use mostly and most of the time of mixtures. And modern biology is catching on. Our most advanced cancer therapies, which can be very toxic, especially historically speaking. However, these days, scientists and medical doctors are utilizing multiple pronged attacks against the cancer so that they can reduce the dose. That means equal or greater effectiveness for the patient, but at less toxicity. So the plants have been doing this for millions of years, and they have had an immense amount of evolutionary experience through pressures of required survival, and they've gotten very good at making chemical mixtures to target very specific actions in other biologic organisms. Luckily, we as humans get to enjoy the fruits of the efforts of plants in this regards, and in this way they have become our allies and our teachers because they teach us so much about biology and these biologic systems. I'm Dr. Jake Felice here from the Washington coast. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate you guys. Please feel free to leave comments, likes. I try to answer as many comments as I can. And you can find and follow me at sweetwaterholistic.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Aloha. How can botanical synergy help with the epidemic of chronic disease in the United States and the rest of the world? We have been having for the last 20 years a steady increase in heart disease. 1 in 3 humans now will be getting cancer at some point in their life. Diabetes incidence has doubled since the year 2000. We have an epidemic of obesity and arthritis. And part of the problem, I do believe, is an over-reliance on single molecule drugs. About 75% of our diseases are chronic diseases now, which is something by definition that the medical system is not adequately addressing, with only 25% being acute conditions. And I think that plants offer a wonderful opportunity to solve a part of this problem, largely because they can often offer a high degree of efficacy at a much lower level of toxicity and better tolerability than single molecule drugs. One of the reasons they do this is because they are addressing multiple chemical pathways at the same time and helping to stabilize biologic networks. There is something that is called synergy, which is where the whole of these different plant chemicals is greater than the sum of the parts. And there's a reason why plants use mixtures to create chemicals that affect other organisms or to affect physiology specifically. And that's because mixtures actually work better in the real world when plants are faced with evolutionary pressures. They have self-selected mixtures to do a lot of their work, whether that be in self-defense against predators or herbivores trying to eat them, whether that plants will actually use molecules to heal themselves if they've been crushed or damaged. And I have a whole set of video clips on this that you can check out. Today I want to talk about this plant synergy where the combination of molecules adds to a better or greater effect. And in the next video clip, we will discuss how they decrease bad side effects. But today we're going to talk about benefits. And I want to talk about 3 plants as individual plants that outperform the single molecules that they produce, and also blends or combinations of herbs that botanists and herbalists, naturopathic doctors blend together to achieve these same synergistic purposes. And I think it's really worth emphasizing the vast majority of botanical medicine practice today uses multiple plants or combinations of plants. And I hope you'll see a little bit of perhaps why that makes a lot of sense. First thing I want to talk about is cannabis. Whole plant cannabis offers much better effectiveness against spasticity than the single molecule THC itself. Also, whole plant cannabis can be 2 to 4 times greater in its effectiveness to treat chronic pain than just utilizing the isolates. And also there's a lot of good evidence that combinations of cannabinoids such as CBD plus THC can have benefits that are not found when those molecules are not used together in the plant. Another one of my favorite plants, St. John's wort, Hypericum, is another great study in how whole plant combination of mixtures can achieve equal or greater results to pharmacologic single molecule therapy with better tolerability and less toxicity or fewer side effects. St. John's wort makes a molecule called hyperforin, and hyperforin is a reuptake inhibitor of some of the neurotransmitters that you may have heard of before: serotonin, dopamine. When these molecules reuptake is inhibited, there are a higher degree of them in the synapse. Also, this molecule from St. John's wort does also affect GABA. So three of our classic feel-good neurotransmitters, serotonin, GABA, and dopamine, their reuptake is inhibited, and many scientists, when they first looked at the plant, they thought, oh, that is the molecule that makes this plant effective. But we now know from studies that there are combinations of effects happening. There are procyanidins that also assist in this reuptake inhibition, so they help the hyperforin also increase those levels of serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. And the whole plant also has phenols, which increase the bioavailability. So when we look at experimental data, we can see that there is an antidepressant effect from St. John's wort at much lower levels of the leading chemical or leading compound than we would expect. And so that the total extract and not the isolate explains the full antidepressant effect. And again, this is multiple pathways. Think of it as addressing and stabilizing a network as opposed to working on just one single pathway. Also, Willow, which is very good and effective. Aspirin comes from Willow. I did a whole video clip on this, which I'll link to. But the polyphenols that are present in Willow prevent some of the stomach irritating effect that we find in aspirin. Also want to talk about blends today. One of my favorite class of herbs, helps us think better. Ginkgo is known to be one of these herbs, and also ginseng, known separately to help cognition. If we look at arithmetic tests to gauge cognition and speed, Ginkgo can help increase the speed with which we can do mathematic calculations, and ginseng can increase the accuracy. But when we combine them together and we put humans through a test, something called the serial sevens, 7, 14, 21, 28, you know how to do it, but keep doing it, keep doing the math. The combination of the ginseng along with the ginkgo together provides a synergistic effect, so that not only the speed but also the accuracy is increased. We also know for sleep and anxiety, kava kava has very good effectiveness against anxiety, as does passion flower. Each of these can relieve anxiety on their own, but if we are hoping for the patient to have sleep, especially from stress-induced loss of sleep, the combination of the passion flower with the kava together leads to greater results. And one of my favorite botanical blends is called Iberogast. It's a combination of 9 different plant molecules, is very effective for dyspepsia and irritable bowel syndrome. And I talked in a previous video clip about digestive health and herbs and why we need to use more than one class of herbs. Bitters, which stimulate the digestive juices and acids, aromatics, which help increase peristalsis, and demulcents, which can soothe and offer anti-inflammatory effects locally, almost like a topical going through the digestive tract. So again, these multiple plant compounds, more effective than either separately, and again, think of this stabilization of a network. I'm Dr. Jake Felice. You can find me at sweetwaterholistic.com. I've got a bunch of videos on all aspects of natural health up there, Please like these videos, please share. I really appreciate your comments, and thank you so very much for listening. I really appreciate it. Cheers.